When the officer called my name at the precinct, I stood up, already knowing what I had to do. My name is Andrew Keller. I'm 38 years old, an accountant from Newark, New Jersey. But back then, I was 29, and still naive enough to believe that loyalty could fix anything. I'd just arrived at the police station after my mother's frantic call. "It's Daniel," she cried. "He's been arrested. Please, Andrew, do something." Daniel, my younger brother, had been caught stealing electronics from the back room of a tech store he worked at part-time. He was 23, reckless, and always a little too smooth for his own good. When I walked into the interrogation room, he looked up at me. Not scared, not ashamed, just tired. And for some reason that was worse. "Tell them it was a mistake," he whispered. "Say I logged it wrong or something." I didn't answer. I just stared at him. Later I asked to speak with the store manager. I offered a version of events that painted Daniel as disorganized, but not malicious. A kid who botched some inventory entries and mistakenly triggered a theft report. I even volunteered to review their financial logs to support the claim. The store dropped charges within days. At home, my mother cried and hugged me like I'd saved her life. "You always take care of him," she said, "just like your father would have." Daniel? He didn't say much. "Thanks," he muttered, eyes on his phone. And that was it. I wish I could say that was the day things changed, that Daniel learned a lesson, that our family came together. But the truth is, something inside me shifted that week. I started seeing him for who he really was, not a lost kid, but a man who always knew someone would catch him before he hit the ground. And for the first time, I realized that someone was always me. For weeks after that incident, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror without remembering the lie I told. It wasn't just the story I spun for the store manager. It was the trust I broke with myself. I was raised to believe in accountability, in hard work, and truth. Yet I'd buried all of that to protect someone who didn't even say he was sorry. Daniel moved on quickly. He stayed out of jail, but not out of trouble. I heard whispers from my mother, missed shifts, borrowed money from relatives, a new girlfriend already complaining about his bad habits. I kept my distance. I didn't want to be dragged into his orbit again. Still, I kept paying his phone bill. I slipped cash into my mother's grocery drawer when I knew he'd been asking her for money. It wasn't love, it was guilt. I had enabled him. I'd rewritten the facts and handed him a clean slate, and all he did was smudge it again. One night, maybe 6 months later, I sat alone in my apartment staring at an email I couldn't send. I had drafted it to the store manager, admitting what really happened. But I never clicked send. What good would it do now? The damage was done, and it wasn't just to the store, it was to me. My work life became my refuge. Numbers didn't lie. Budgets didn't manipulate. My spreadsheets were honest in a way my family never had been. I buried myself in deadlines and monthly reports, earning quiet praise and growing trust from my supervisors. At family gatherings, I played the role. I brought wine. I asked Daniel how things were going, even when I knew the answer would be some vague lie. I smiled at my mother as if nothing had changed, but something had. A crack had formed in the way I saw my brother. It didn't make a sound, but it split deeper with every forced conversation. And all I could think was, I covered for him once, never again. When I was offered the position at Lennox Freight in Jersey City, I didn't hesitate. It was a promotion, senior financial analyst, and a fresh start. I was 34 then, and though the commute was longer, the office was modern, the team sharp, and most importantly, nobody knew anything about Daniel or my family. I could just be Andrew Keller, the guy who worked late, got things done, and didn't overshare. The work was intense but rewarding. Lennox managed logistics for several major retailers, and I handled large volumes of inventory tracking, vendor payments, and internal audits. It was the kind of job where every detail mattered, and that suited me perfectly. I could lose myself in rows of numbers, trace patterns, spot anomalies. It gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. Within 6 months, my manager was assigning me high-profile projects. I earned their trust, and they left me alone to do what I did best: find problems before they became disasters. It was exactly the kind of stability I needed. I moved into a new apartment closer to the river. Nothing fancy, but quiet and clean. I started reading again. Non-fiction mostly, biographies, true crime. I went to the gym, kept a routine. I built a life that didn't involve bailing anyone out. As for my family, contact grew more sporadic. My mum would call every few weeks, mostly to talk about her garden or church. I listened, kept the conversation light. Daniel rarely came up, and I didn't ask. I didn't want to know. Every now and then, though, I'd feel it, that dull ache in my chest, the memory of that police station, the silence after I saved him. It would creep up when I was reviewing a flagged invoice or walking home alone in the dark. It reminded me that the past wasn't gone, just buried. Still, I told myself, this was my new life. Clean, honest, quiet. And I planned to keep it that way. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Daniel showed up at my office building. I was reviewing vendor statements when the front desk receptionist called up. "There's a man downstairs asking for you. Says he's your brother, Daniel Keller." My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen him in over 2 years. I considered telling her to send him away, but something in me paused. When I reached the lobby, he was leaning against the glass doors, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the floor like he wasn't sure whether to stay or bolt. He looked tired, thinner, but not different. "Hey," he said, grinning like we'd seen each other last week. "Heard you were doing well." I didn't hug him, just nodded. "What do you want, Daniel?" He sighed, shifting his weight. "Look, I'm not here to mess anything up. I need work, something short-term. I've been clean, trying to get it together." I didn't say anything. He filled the silence like he always did. "I heard your company's hiring in warehouse ops. I can lift boxes. I'll do nights, weekends, whatever." I wanted to say no. I wanted to walk away and pretend I hadn't seen him. But something tugged at me. Maybe guilt, maybe habit. So I told him to wait, went upstairs, and spoke to a colleague in logistics. They needed seasonal help in the distribution wing. I vouched for him carefully. By the end of the week, Daniel had a badge, a uniform, and a rotating shift in the loading dock. We barely spoke. He worked nights. I worked days. But occasionally I'd see his name on a report, a timestamp on a dock entry log. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, giving him a chance but from a safe distance. He was just my brother again, a name on a list, an old scar I tried not to touch. But deep down, I knew I'd opened a door I'd once sworn to keep closed. It started with a missing barcode. One of the junior analysts flagged it during a routine inventory check. A pallet of high-end headphones had left the warehouse with no corresponding outbound order. The delivery log showed Daniel's ID badge as the last scan on the dock that night. At first, I brushed it off. Shipping errors happened. Items misplaced, scanned twice, mislabeled. But the timing made my gut twist. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. It had been months since Daniel started. No complaints, no red flags. Still, I started paying closer attention. I quietly pulled delivery manifests from the nights he worked. I compared shipping orders against stock movement. Tiny discrepancies appeared. An extra item here, a missing serial number there. Nothing that would raise alarms individually, but taken together, a pattern began to form. I didn't report it. Not yet. I wanted to believe I was wrong. Maybe someone else on the night shift was slacking. Maybe the software had glitches. But the pit in my stomach grew deeper with each document I reviewed. One morning, I ran into Daniel in the break room. He looked energized, smiling, casual. "Long night?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not bad. Easy shift." I watched him stir sugar into his coffee. His hands didn't shake, his eyes didn't dart, but something felt rehearsed. Later that day, I checked the inventory logs from his shift. 3 handheld barcode scanners had gone offline during his window. No explanation, no report. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing him in the back room of that electronics store 9 years ago. The same casual attitude, the same blank denial. I thought about all the chances I'd given him, all the lines I'd crossed to protect him. Now here he was, standing on the edge again. Only this time he was dragging my world into it. And I knew I had to find out the truth, not just for my company, but for myself. I started with the cameras. Our warehouse had limited surveillance, just a few fixed angles near the loading docks and break areas, not nearly enough to build a full picture. So I submitted a quiet request for access to the raw footage from the nights Daniel worked, citing a discrepancy in a shipment audit. No one asked questions. They trusted me. I spent hours scrubbing through grainy video, watching forklifts move, pallets shift, workers shuffle past the lens. Most of it was routine, boring even, until it wasn't. In one clip, Daniel appeared at the far end of the dock. He looked over his shoulder, waited, then pushed a small unmarked box behind a larger crate. 2 hours later, another worker arrived, someone I didn't recognize from the payroll. He wheeled the crate to a truck that wasn't on our scheduled dispatch list. I replayed the footage a dozen times. The resolution was low, the angles imperfect, but the timing was damning. The manifest from that night showed the crate as partial shipment returned. But the inventory records had already marked everything as shipped. It was subtle, sloppy, but subtle. I needed more. I placed a small GoPro-style camera near the rear corner of the loading zone, hidden behind an old file cabinet no one used. I timed it to record during the graveyard shifts, Daniel's shifts. It ran off motion detection. Every morning, I downloaded the footage and scrubbed through it. On the third night, I saw it. Daniel entering the bay with a clipboard and a duffel bag. He opened the duffel, pulled out packaging tape, and started resealing boxes that had already been scanned out. He then pushed them into a separate stack near the back. It was undeniable. But what hit me hardest wasn't the theft, it was how comfortable he looked. Calm, focused, like he'd done this before. And that's when it sank in. He hadn't changed. Not at all. He'd just gotten better at hiding it. I needed to hear his voice say it. The footage alone was strong, but I wanted more, something direct, undeniable. A confession, even a partial one, would seal it. I wasn't sure how I'd get it, but I knew Daniel well. If I played it right, he'd talk. So I called him. "Hey," I said casually, "can we meet? I've been noticing some things at work. Small stuff, but enough to raise eyebrows. Thought maybe you'd have some insight." He hesitated, then agreed to meet after his shift. We sat outside a diner near the industrial park, the kind that never closes, lit by flickering fluorescent lights and half-empty coffee pots. I wore a hoodie, kept my phone recording in my front pocket. I felt sick. Daniel showed up late, looking relaxed. Too relaxed. "Everything okay?" he asked, sliding into the booth. I nodded slowly. "I've been seeing a few weird entries on the logs. Shipments going out without matching orders, scanners going offline. You ever run into that?" He shrugged, sipped his coffee. "The system's always glitchy, people forget to scan stuff, it's a mess. But you haven't seen anything." "Off?" I pressed. His eyes narrowed, just for a second. Then he laughed. "You think I'm stealing or something?" I held his gaze. "Should I?" He leaned back, arms crossed. "Look, I know what I'm doing. If something's disappearing, it's not me." There it was, the slip. "You're saying you could do it," I said quietly. "If you wanted." He smirked. "Man, if I wanted to. You wouldn't even see it happen." That was enough, not a confession, but a window. A crack in his mask. He was arrogant, careless, and still convinced he was smarter than everyone around him. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I stood up, paid the check, and told him I'd see him around. I walked out with my hands shaking, but I had what I needed. His words, his voice. And this time, he wouldn't see it coming. I spent the weekend gathering everything. The footage from the warehouse cameras, the GoPro clips, the audit logs, the recorded conversation. I organized it all into a secure folder, encrypted and labeled with timestamps, dates, and cross-referenced shipment numbers. Every piece of evidence was precise, clean, undeniable. On Monday morning, I created a new email address. No name, no identifiers, just a string of numbers. I composed a message to the company's internal compliance office and CC'd the head of HR and legal. Subject line: suspected internal theft, evidence enclosed. I didn't write much, just that I had reason to believe an employee was involved in repeated product theft and had included video, logs, and a voice recording as supporting material. I signed it. A concerned employee who believes in accountability. Then I hit send. No turning back. I watched from my desk as the company began to react. That afternoon, the director of operations left a meeting abruptly. The head of security was seen reviewing footage. There were hushed conversations in hallways, closed-door meetings, sudden schedule changes. Daniel kept working like nothing was happening. He had no idea. By Thursday, I was called into a general staff meeting where the VP reminded everyone about zero-tolerance policies and ongoing investigations. My hands stayed folded, my face blank. I knew the storm was circling. Friday morning, Daniel didn't show up for his shift. Later that day, I overheard someone mention that HR had called him in unexpectedly. He looked nervous, they said. didn't even finish his coffee. I said nothing. That evening, as I shut down my computer, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not triumph, not revenge, control. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't confronted, I hadn't exposed myself. I had let the truth do the talking. And the truth was loud enough. It happened fast. By Monday morning, the entire loading dock was buzzing. Security had escorted Daniel out of the building just after dawn. Some said he tried to argue. Others claimed he looked stunned, like he couldn't believe it was actually happening. No one really knew what was said behind that closed conference room door. But I knew. From my office window, I saw him being led through the parking lot, flanked by 2 security officers. His hands weren't cuffed, but they might as well have been. He didn't look around, didn't fight, just walked, head down, like the weight of every lie he ever told had finally caught up with him. It was surreal. I expected to feel satisfaction, maybe even relief, but what I felt was silence, not emptiness, just quiet. The kind of stillness that follows a storm, the kind that lets you hear your own thoughts for the first time in years. I kept working, answered emails, finalized a quarterly report. No one suspected I'd been the whistleblower. I was just another face in the office that day. Just another co-worker surprised by the scandal. Later that week, an internal memo confirmed Daniel's termination for gross misconduct and breach of company policy. They didn't mention the police report, but I heard through the grapevine that legal action was pending. Corporate didn't want to make a scene, but they weren't letting it slide. I didn't reach out to him. I didn't answer the text he sent, just one line. "You set me up?" I deleted it. There was nothing left to say. He'd made his choices, and for the first time in my life, I hadn't cleaned up the mess for him. I'd simply let him face the consequences he'd dodged for so long, and in that, I found something I never expected to feel again: freedom. Spring came late that year. I remember walking home one evening, the wind off the river still sharp, but the air beginning to carry that faint trace of renewal, wet pavement, blooming trees, the distant sound of kids playing again in the park. Everything felt slower, quieter. In the weeks following Daniel's arrest, my life returned to its usual rhythm. Work was steady. My apartment remained neat and undisturbed. I went to the gym, picked up groceries, filed my taxes. The only difference was the weight that had lifted. The invisible pressure I'd carried for nearly a decade, of being the fixer, the protector, the reluctant shield, was gone. I visited my mother once. She didn't ask about Daniel. She didn't need to. She looked tired, older. We sat on her porch, shared coffee, and talked about the hydrangeas she wanted to plant. I offered to help, but we both knew I wouldn't be back soon. I didn't mention the theft. She didn't bring up the police. Some things had passed the point of discussion. They just hung in the air between us like fog, quiet, unspoken. Sometimes late at night I'd think about him, not with anger, not even regret, just clarity. Daniel had always been who he was. Charming, careless, and ultimately destructive. I spent years believing I could change that love, sacrifice, or silence could steer him right. But you can't rescue someone who's rowing toward the rocks on purpose. And now, finally, I wasn't in the boat with him. I wasn't the fall guy. I wasn't the brother cleaning up spilled lies. I was just Andrew Keller, an accountant, a man who'd made peace with his past, and who had stopped apologizing for doing the right thing. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure. All I needed was the quiet, and now I had it.